immediately staking a central claim, preparing to develop pieces toward the action. Developing the knight to f6 immediately prepares for potential queenside castling and contests the central e4 square. Developing the knight opens lines for piece activation and prepares to control the center. Establishing a central pawn presence immediately challenges white's early development and seeks to unclog black's pieces. Unleashing a pawn thrust, white immediately challenges the central pawn structure, aiming to seize initiative. Solidifying the center, this move prepares for a robust pawn chain and aims to counter white's queenside expansion. Reinforcing central presence, this knight subtly prepares for potential pawn advances, orchestrating a harmonious build-up. Immediately embracing the central tension, black sacrifices pawn structure for a moment to solidify development, aiming for piece activity. Recovering the pawn with bishop development, white prepares to seize central space, opening lines for future attacks. Embracing the queenside expanse, black boldly anchors their pawn chain, seeking to expand influence and restrict white's central reach. Seizing space on the queenside, this move seeks to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially open lines for attack. Advancing the pawn further creates immediate pawn chain tension, but it might overextend and become a target for white's pieces. Retreating the knight to b1 cedes central control and concedes space, a positional concession aimed at simplifying or defending. Unleashing the bishop to threaten the queen sets up an immediate tactical skirmish and demands white's attention. Connecting the rooks, this unleashes central pressure and prepares for kingside expansion. Reinforcing the queenside pawn chain, this move solidifies black's position and prepares for future queenside expansion. Capturing the pawn opens lines and prepares to anchor your bishop for potential central control. Exchanging the bishop clarifies the center and prepares queenside expansion. Unpinning the queen opens crucial lines for attack and liberates pieces for central influence. Unveiling the queen, black intends to challenge white's central dominance and gain immediate activity. Developing the knight to a more active square prepares for central pawn support and potentially knight's exchanges, improving piece coordination. Challenging the central pawn structure creates immediate tension, seeking to disrupt white's piece harmony. Simplifying the position by clearing the queens can lead to a surprisingly favorable pawn structure for white, restricting black's development. Recapturing the pawn untangles the knight and prepares for a more active central role. This pawn push boldly stakes central territory and opens lines for your knights to infiltrate. Knight repositions to a more active central outpost, threatening white's pawn and eyeing potential breakthroughs. Solidifying the d4 pawn's defense, this quiet maneuver prepares to expand on the queenside while preventing immediate pawn breaks. Consolidating pieces for central pressure, this knight finds a natural home, preparing to join the fight for control of the d5 square. Repositioning the bishop to create a better diagonal for kingside pressure and control. Developing the bishop to e7 solidifies the center and prepares for kingside castling, a sensible step in this symmetrical pawn structure. Unlocking the c-file is key, threatening to pry open lines and activate the rook. Securing the king amidst the central pawn chain's rigidity sets up a more robust defensive structure. Securing the monarch's safety now allows white to actively pursue central pawn advances and improved piece development. Rfc8 marshals the rook to the central column, preparing to contest its control. Opening that d-file allows for immediate pressure and future pawn advances along its length. Reclaiming the pawn strategically repositions the knight to a more active square. Exchanging pieces simplifies the position, potentially leading to an endgame where white might have a slight advantage in piece activity. Reclaiming the attacked bishop solidifies the pawn structure and frees the knight. The pawn lunges forward, aiming to cage the enemy knight and seize further central territory. Shifting the bishop to e7 prepares for its redeployment, potentially to g5 or h4, to contest white's central influence. Asserting dominion over the fourth rank now, the rook prepares to disrupt black's queenside pawn structure and limit the scope of the knight. Repositioning the knight to d7 aims to prepare a subsequent push on the c-file or potentially reroute to f6, reinforcing the central control. Reinforcing the open c-file with the rook establishes dominance and prepares for future infiltration, potentially targeting the king's safety later. Exchanging the rooks here offers to alleviate some pressure, though it opens the c-file for your opponent's remaining rook. Clearing the central file creates immediate pressure and potential for breakthroughs, aiming to isolate black's knight. The knight ventures out to pressure the pawn chain, aiming to disrupt white's queenside structure. Challenging the knight's outpost, this rook maneuver aims to disrupt black's central pawn structure and pressure the b-pawn. Shifting the knight to d5 seeks to exploit the c3 square, and potentially eye the d4 pawn while white's rook pressure remains on the c-file. Solidifying the queenside pawns now, aiming for a more robust pawn structure and potential expansion. Securing the king amidst the storm, a vital step toward activating the knight and improving the bishop's scope. A strategic repositioning, aiming to activate the knight and potentially pressure black's kingside pawn structure. Relocating the king to a more secure central square, preparing to activate the rook on the now open c-file and solidify defensive coordination. Liberating the knight to d7 and pressure black's queenside is a bold bid for central control, forcing black to react. Relocating the king to the center begins a careful redeployment, preparing to potentially contest the now open central files and re-establish defensive solidity. Securing the king's central retreat offers crucial defensive stability for white's advancing pawns. This maneuver prepares to reposition the bishop, aiming to contest the central squares and potentially harass white's king. Actively marching the king forward, white aims to exploit the open diagonals and centralize their monarch. Centralizing the bishop redeems its earlier passive placement, aiming to counter white's queenside pressure with active diagonal influence. Forcing the black king into a vulnerable central position creates immediate tactical opportunities. Shifting the king to the center offers a haven from the open files and prepares to support the knight's central advance. This knight jump reclaims space and targets crucial squares, aiming to exploit black's somewhat passive pawn structure. Restoring the bishop to its more active central diagonal offers better defense and potential counterplay. The rook invades the queenside, threatening the knight and aiming to exploit the weakened pawns. This retreat on the bishop from a6 to b6 strategically reinforces the knight on d5, preparing for a potential central pawn push or simply improving the piece's defensive posture. Asserting control of the fifth rank with this pawn advance squeezes black's knight and prepares further queenside expansion. A surprising recapture, sacrificing pawn structure for piece activity and creating immediate complications for white's rook. The king's repositioning opens lines and aims to support the advanced pawns. Unleashing a desperate check, black attempts to disrupt white's firmly established king safety. Stepping back the rook to defend the pawn, accepting queenside isolation for now. Repositioning the rook to the open file seeks to pressure white's weakened queenside and create dynamic counterplay. Snatching the knight offers immediate material gain, but opens a critical diagonal for black's rook to penetrate. Attempting to reroute the knight to a more active square, but the rook's pressure on the seventh rank remains a significant concern. Pivoting the rook to the sixth rank intensifies pressure on the vulnerable knight, threatening a swift exchange and endgame advantage. Reclaiming the initiative, black eyes the open file with the rook, aiming to disrupt white's coordinated pieces. King escape route closure. Now the white monarch ventures, seeking refuge on the queenside flank.